Welcome to How We Rode the Social Media Wave. This is a specific technology lessons learned in doing a marketing case. When I first started doing technology transfer back in the early 1990s, I was actually doing a lot of snail mail and some email, but a lot of faxing. And things have changed significantly since those early days. Now we do a lot of emailing, although we avoid attachments, and we'll talk about why that is. We do web listings, blogs, and Twitter. These are all very different things that didn't exist back in the 90s. And so this webinar is going to focus on some of those lessons learned and new techniques that are available today. I'm joined today with my colleague, Danielle McCulloch.
Thanks, Laura. As Laura mentioned, I'm Danielle McCulloch, and over the course of my career, I've been involved with technology in a variety of different settings. So I've worked in process engineering, manufacturing management, and also product development and marketing. And as Laura mentioned, things have really changed in how you approach the marketing of different technologies in a variety of different forums. And so I've worked with our team to incorporate the different elements of social media as we evolve our marketing to match the tools that are available in the market today. And we employ these as we help our clients with strategic management of their technology portfolios.
Thanks, Danielle. So today what we're going to be doing is walking through a specific case study, but we're also going to be discussing how that might impact what you think about as you embark on your campaign, both traditional marketing as well as using the social media aspects. And then we'll also cover some of the specifics associated with how you would do social media. So not every step of the way in a marketing activity includes social media. You really have to incorporate other traditional mechanisms. And you can't really discuss social media in a vacuum. You've got to look at it in the context of the specific marketing strategy that you've developed for the particular technology. Putting things in that context really has to start with looking at how you've gotten here to begin with. And for those of you who have participated in our previous webinars that really go into the details of all of these different steps, you will remember that our philosophy is that you start with many technologies and you go through a filtering process to identify those technologies that have the highest potential for market acceptance, starting with the screening activity, assessment, and then moving into marketing. And we are going to be focusing on one aspect of marketing today, and that's the augmentation of other mechanisms with social media. But remember that while you're doing marketing of your particular technology, you also want to take a look at your portfolio as a whole and determine if some of the other technologies that you have designated for passive marketing can join the ride. Join the activities that you're doing in your active marketing campaign to really help you leverage. And so that helps people that are interested in your technology see the depth and breadth of what you have to offer them. Now again, we had webinars that covered the specifics of how to do screening, assessment, and marketing before we got to this point, and that's what helped in educating the understanding of what markets are we going after and what are they interested in this particular technology. So our presumption in talking about this case study today is that we've already performed all of these steps and have the results of the assessment to inform how we're going to pursue the market. So now let's talk about the specifics of this particular case. This particular technology is a freeze-resistant drinking system for cold weather athletes, military, and rescue personnel. The straws in these hydration systems that are on the market today are very prone to freezing, and so the technology overcomes that problem with either a passive or an active heating mechanism. Now this was particularly good for social media. It lent itself very well to it for a variety of reasons. First, it was very easy to understand, and we could get great photographs, which are key aspects to social media. It had a very well-defined market. We knew who the players were. They weren't necessarily a large number of players, even though the end market was quite big and consumer-based. And through social media, we could actually reach some of the consumers that would be interested in this technology so that they could provide feedback to the organizations that would be interested in licensing it that this was a technology of interest. And we also happen to have had a very interesting inventor, and his activities were quite interesting. Now, we can't do any kind of marketing activity, even newfangled as social media, without starting with the basics. And so before we start to do any kind of communication campaign, we always start with what we call the ammo. First off, you need to understand who your audience is. Who are the people that you're trying to target, and then understand what's important to them. What's the message that you want to convey to that audience that will catch their attention and make them want to speak with you in order to learn more, and then also presumably also want to license your technology. And then the next one is what mechanisms to use. Which ways are you going to reach out and communicate with them? And in this particular webinar, we're going to focus on the social media mechanisms, but we're still going to talk about some of the other traditional tools. And then finally, what's the outcome? What's the call to action that you want them to do? Do you want them to pick up the phone and call you, or click and get more information? What's that end game? So now let's break it down for this particular case study. Who was our audience? In this case, again, it was pretty straightforward. There were 10 to 15 manufacturers of high-performance equipment for elite athletes. We knew who they were, and we knew that they had mass markets, but this particular technology was just a niche component of all of their different product lines. It was really just for the extreme condition product line that they had. And we also knew that we had the mass market of their consumers could also be reached through social media, even though our specific targets for getting interest back were these 10 to 15. Now the second part is, what was the message that we were crafting specifically for this particular technology? Again, it was pretty simple and straightforward. People in cold environments still need water. They don't need ice, and this technology helps to make sure that the water doesn't freeze. Now, in crafting the message for social media, you have to think differently than you have in the past when you were doing traditional mechanisms. You have to think in terms of shorter and sound bites. So even though this webinar is going to talk really about how to strategically use social media tools, we've provided in the back of your handout a lot more details on the tactics of using things like Twitter and Bitly. So you may think I'm glossing over a few things here, but we have provided you with some of that meat in the handout. So for now, let's talk about the bigger picture aspects of your social media. Again, sound bites. You have to be catchy, focus on what the technology can do for them, not how it works. So what is that market need? In our case, it was the fact that the water doesn't freeze. So also be very simple in your language, because you've only got 140 characters if you're doing a tweet, and you also want to make sure that you leave enough room for retweeting, so you've got that limit in the number of characters. Now, in addition to thinking about what the specifics of the technology are, it's also making sure that you are capturing what's in it for them. So that, again, that focus to the market needs, but also trying to be timely in what those conditions might be of what they're interested in. So you want to take a look at some of the things that are going on in your region or for the market if they are going to any kind of trade shows or things like that. Are things happening in the world right now that impact the use of this technology? Be as timely as you possibly can and capture world events in your communications for social media. So in one of the aspects of this particular technology was that we were at war in a region that has extreme cold conditions in the mountains in Afghanistan, and so this technology had relevance for some news stories, and we were able to leverage that. You'll also see from some other things that we'll talk about later that our inventor was involved in some very timely activities. Each one of these different things give you an opportunity to touch your audience again. You want multiple points during your campaign to do social media interactions. It's not a one-shot deal. And so here are a couple of additional ideas that you might use to continue that engagement throughout your entire campaign, such as creating a top 10 list, leveraging other people's posts to talk about your technology. Things like that can help you have communications throughout the process. Now, what mechanism should you use? The most important thing to think about is where your audience lives. So again, remember in your ammo, you start with who the audience is. Is this an audience that is very traditional in their communication mechanisms? in which case social media may not be effective for you? Or are they pretty modern? Are they doing a lot of work with consumers, in which case they are much more likely to be using social media? So think about that. What type of events do they go to? And is that something that you should be attending, in which case you can be doing some social media activities when you go to these events? And then also think in terms of your budget, because just because they're going to a trade show doesn't mean you can afford to go to that trade show, especially if you don't think the technology is going to bring back enough return on your investment. We covered this in detail during the marketing webinar, but it's worth communicating that again. Just because social media is primarily digital, you may think that it's not very costly, but it will still cost you in terms of time and also part of your strategy of where you might be going and what you might be doing. So always keep in mind, what is a reasonable budget for the outcome that you expect for this technology, and match things up. So for example, a technology that is going to yield you a lot of potential licensing revenue, you may want to do a lot of social media activities. For other technologies that might be quite niche, then maybe you don't want to do quite as many, because that would be a big time commitment on your part. Now we need to also think about this in terms of the traditional mechanisms that you're also using, because you can leverage these as part of your social media activity. So for example, a printed flyer, that's something that we always create, at least the electronic version of a technology description. When you create this, you can tweet about it. You can talk about the fact it has just been created. But you always also want to still be doing that calling. Pick up the phone and call your leads, whether it's warm calls that resulted from the assessment that you did or cold calls, because that's where the true interaction is going to happen. Social media cannot replace those detailed discussions about your technology and about the market's interest in that technology. Other things that you can leverage when they occur to do social media releases would be when you have a press release, or maybe you get an award. If you're doing any kind of trade shows or briefings, which again we'll talk about a little later how we leverage those in this particular case. But each of those is an opportunity to share information or use social media to communicate. Your web page is the #1 place you want to make sure you have a description of your technology or product that you have. Everything you do in social media will point back to that web page. So when you do a tweet, you will have a URL, a tiny URL that points back to the web page. There's a couple reasons for this. One, the web page allows you to have the most information about your technology, again something we covered in quite a bit of detail during the marketing webinar. But it also provides you traffic back to your website in general, which will help you with your other marketing activities. Other areas that once you've written that technology listing that we are proponents of using are things like Flintbox, iBridge, or Autumn's Global Technology Portal. Once you've got the technology description written, it is a very low cost to post it on these other mechanisms as well. Other things that we like to add to our web page and give us tools for additional tweets and blogs are if we are able to do inventor interviews or any kind of product demonstrations. Anything you can do that is multimedia that enhances the discussion about the technology is a great benefit. And nowadays, people have low attention spans. They want to see more pictures and get more audio. They're accustomed to seeing video and interactive. Less reading, more viewing. So these are all important things that you can leverage for social media. Now, what are those different social media mechanisms? I've mentioned Twitter a couple times. One of the areas that we focus quite a bit for technology marketing has actually also been on LinkedIn. These are group discussions where if you can identify a group that is specific to your technology area, you can post information about your technology much in the same way you would tweet, only you are going into a group and either starting a discussion or providing them information that goes back to your website with information about your technology. You can also put it on your status updates. For example, if you connect your Twitter account to your LinkedIn account, Every time you tweet, it will update your status. Or when you post a blog, it will update your status on LinkedIn with your latest blog posting. So it can be very efficient if you set up your tools to be interactive with each other. On LinkedIn groups, for example, I had a technology that we'll be discussing a little later, which was a polyimide high-performance flexible display technology. There happens to be a group on LinkedIn specifically for high-performance polyimides. So you can't get much more focused than that. And these were the players from DuPont and the big polyimide manufacturers. So it was very easy access. You may be surprised by some of the groups you find when you do a keyword search on LinkedIn to find the right groups for you. You can also look for specific individuals. If you know the company you're looking for, look to see who's on LinkedIn who works for that company and make direct contact with them. So it's not just the groups, but it's also the people. It is expanding your Rolodex. Now again, we talked about Twitter, and we're going to talk in more detail about how we use Twitter in this case, but this is not the I'm going to the store to buy groceries type of tweets. These are relevant to your technology, and so they are business-related tweets. A blog is a much more detailed description, but still not as detailed as your website. The advantage of blogging is that it does get picked up much more quickly by search engines, and so you can improve your Google Analytics by having people following your blog and by posting on your blog, as well as how many people are following your tweets. All of those improve your Google hit rate. Facebook is an area that we previously, when we started with social media, was not very relevant for technology marketing. It was very person to person, not even consumer to consumer, but really person to person. That has evolved, and it has become more of a mechanism for businesses who are interested in reaching out to their consumers. And so Facebook is something that may be relevant for you for the types of technologies you may be looking at. Companies like Southwest, which is an airline in the United States, are very adept at communicating with their consumers through Facebook. Universities will find Facebook particularly relevant for them because their professors and their students are there, and so their internal audience, this is a mechanism by which they can reach out to the internal players. Now, YouTube and SlideShare are not singular vehicles by which you would be advertising your technology. They are additional outlets for multimedia content that you would have. So you put it on your website, but you'd also, if you had a video, you would also put it on YouTube. And if it was a presentation, you'd use SlideShare. Now, newer things that are coming out, and actually they've been around for a little while, but from a technology transfer perspective, they may not be quite as ingrained quite yet. So a QR code is essentially like a barcode, only it takes a user who uses usually their smartphone to a website. So it is a direct link to a website. Rather than giving a URL or a bit.ly, you would just do a QR code on the corner of a poster or a flyer, and it would take them directly to your technology page. These are inexpensive to use and very effective. So go ahead and use them. It just enhances the ability for people to get to your digital content faster. Pinterest is kind of where Facebook was a couple years ago from a technology transfer perspective. It's more individual-based, people sharing pictures and products that they like. Something to keep in mind in the future, but right now we're not leveraging it because we don't see it as a high potential for a business-to-business marketing tool, but that may change just as Facebook did. StumbleUpon is similar to Google, and Quora is similar to like an Answers.com or an Ask Jeeves. The difference between those two and their predecessors is that they are leveraging social media ratings and what other people are finding, and other people are adding content to those sites, so they're heavy in the social media. Something to keep in mind moving forward. I wouldn't focus on those right now, but if you can augment where else you're posting to there without it costing you a whole lot more, no reason not to do it. Virtual events could be a combination of doing webinars, doing tweet-ups, things like that. They can be very cost-effective, and if you record, for example, a webinar, you can put it on your website, and so it augments your content. So rather than a podcast with an inventor, maybe it's a webinar briefing of the technology. And so it can enhance the information you've got and post it in multiple places. Now in this particular case, for our hydration system, we did a variety of different mechanisms. So always start with a web page. We had a very comprehensive description of the technology, and all of the content we had available on this particular technology was on the website. It was updated on a regular basis with more information as it was created. We did several blog entries. We tweeted. We did the traditional mechanisms of emails and calls to prospects, did a lot of that, and that's frankly where the majority of our efforts were expended and where yours should be as well. We also did an inventor podcast, and he was also blogging and tweeting, and we were able to leverage that. We went to a trade show, and we also sought and won an R&D 100 award. So we'll talk about how all of these came out and how we did them and what the results were of them as we move forward. Now, what are the outcomes that you really are trying to achieve in any marketing campaign, not just social media, but anything that you're doing? You want to make sure you understand what is success for you. So typically in social media, the success rate is about your click-throughs, making sure that people are following you on Twitter or getting an RSS feed to your blog, but just as importantly that you have links within your content and people are clicking through. Those are the highest value when you are talking about your social media goals and the metrics that you want to measure. And by using things like Bitly, it actually is a great tool that allows you to do analytics on who's clicking and from where and what mechanism. So again, that content is in the back of your pamphlet on how to use Bitly and what the advantages are of the analytics. But again, always want to think about the end in mind. What is your goal at the end of this, and what tools and what messaging are you going to do in order to achieve that goal? Are you looking for partnerships? Are you looking for licensing? Are you looking for people to buy your product? Whatever that is, you need to put that into consideration in your messaging and who you're targeting and how you're targeting. And then always figure out how to measure what it is you're trying to achieve so that you know whether you're being successful or not and whether you need to make adjustments. Now in our case, what we were looking for was we wanted to license for commercial use. And so we were looking for somebody who would create product. But in addition to that, our client was very interested in seeking out partners who would be interested in further developing this as well as some other related technology areas. So this was an area that they wanted to continue to participate in, and so they wanted a broader relationship with whoever the potential licensees were. For our social media aspect, the metrics we used, again, were click rates. That was the most important part of determining whether any of our tools were working and how well they were working. And then for the overall goal of the marketing is always the lead generation of who are you talking to and where are they in the process. Now, the implementation plan that occurred with the hydration system was a little bizarre, actually. We didn't have as much luxury in some of the time frame early on in the campaign because there happened to have been a trade show that was coming up very quickly, and so we had to devise our campaign completely around the early stages of that trade show. And so you'll see week 1 and week 2 were outrageously busy, and we were developing the web content, going to the trade show, tweeting and blogging like one after the other in a very short time frame, and started our phone calls. Now we started the phone calls in that first week because we wanted to make sure that when we got to the trade show we were having one-on-one meetings, and so you want to leverage or maximize going to an event as much as possible. Then we also tweeted and blogged during the trade show, and then you see this long pause where we caught our breath, caught up with a lot of the leads that we had made during the trade show, and then augmented our content in starting again in week 10 and 12 with another podcast, and then emailed to prospects again telling them we just launched a podcast, and then we blogged about the podcast and tweeted it. And then later on, when we got the award, we did the same thing. We blogged about it and tweeted about it, because every time there's new content, then you're able to use that as a reason to do more social media. Now, this would be a more preferred schedule than what we were able to do. The steps are all the same. The only difference that you will see is that you are really spreading out those first 10 weeks. So you don't want to, if at all possible, do a bunch of activity in a short time frame, like 2 weeks, and then go dormant for a while. You'd rather keep it going at a very steady flow over a 10-week period, which is what we would recommend if you've got the luxury of being able to plan things out a little bit more. Now, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Danielle so that she can get into the very specifics of our implementation plan. Danielle?
Thanks, Laura. So as Laura mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the details of specifically how we handled the campaign for this particular hydration technology. And she talked about the importance of the web page. And so that's where we started this campaign as well, was putting together our web page that included information about our technologies. And this is the point where you will always want to start. We'll walk through a couple of examples of web pages in just a moment, but here are some of the key elements that you might want to consider including. And you may not have all of these elements for every technology, but your goal is to put as much relevant information on the web as possible. And clearly, as your campaign goes on, you may have things to add, but at least collect everything you do have up front and try to put it on the web. And as Laura mentioned, we believe that every technology marketing effort that you do should have a web page to go along with it. And some might be very basic and brief, and others might be more robust, like the one for this campaign. And it really provides consistency in the information that you're delivering to prospects, so it makes sure that you're providing complete information. And in the case of negotiations with multiple players, it also helps avoid any claims of unfairness. It can save you a lot of time, because people who are considering your technology can look at it and get the information that they want themselves. They can determine if it's a technology that's a good match for them. And it can also eliminate the people who are just looking for more information but aren't really serious about the technology. So I'll ask Laura if she agrees about this, but in general, I think it's really important to wait on all of the social media aspects and the advanced marketing until you have this web page in place, because this is where you're driving all of the traffic. Laura, do you have any other comments about that?
Absolutely. Your web page is number one, and it's most important. It's where you will put everything that happens, and it's where you allow that self-service. So it reduces your resources in those communications. So it's very important that you have your web page up, and it's got as much information as you can publicly disclose before you start with the rest of the activities.
Yeah, great points. So we'll look here at just a couple of examples of web pages. So this is what we at Fuentech call a mini listing. And this is a type of web page that's appropriate for more of a passive type marketing effort. So something that you're not putting a lot of effort or resources into, but it nonetheless is a technology in your portfolio that you'd like people to know about because it is available for licensing. So as Laura talked about in the very beginning of the webinar, you're going to start out with your screening and your assessment of a technology to determine its commercial potential. And as part of that, you should be developing a description of your technology. So all of the pieces that are a part of this mini listing should have already been developed. Therefore, it's very minimal effort to create this type of web page. For more active campaigns, like the one we did for this hydration system, you're going to develop something that's much more comprehensive. And this is really the other end of the spectrum. So let's walk through the different pieces. Again, we always recommend starting with the market-based description of the technology. It should explain what the technology does, but not all the little intimate details of how the technology works. Then after that, you want to include that list of potential benefits and also highlight the potential applications. This is really where you get to sell your technology to the prospects and highlight the aspects of the technology that are really valuable to them. And if you wish, you can also add some additional detail about the technology that might be of more interest to a more technical audience. So your first description is going to be very simple, talking about what the technology does. In this next part here, under technology details, you might include more information about how it actually works. And again, the information you include is going to be dependent on the IP coverage that you have. You can also include some information about how your technology is better than the state of the art. Again, it allows you to sell your technology and helps people who might be interested understand how you are different or better from what is currently available. We also recommend putting together a list of frequently asked questions. As we mentioned, this is the type of information that helps people serve themselves or get the information that they are looking for, in many cases without having to bother you or contact you, and this in turn is going to save you time. Now, the frequently asked questions is something that you might want to look at updating throughout the course of your marketing effort. Maybe 2 or 3 times over the course of your campaign you'll update it, but you can use questions that people ask you to put additional information into that section. Finally, you always want to be sure to highlight the IP status so that people understand what sort of protection is currently in place. And you also want to state the type of commercial opportunity, licensing opportunity, or partnership that you are seeking. And finally, always make sure that you have contact information included so that someone who is interested knows how they can reach out to you to learn more. Now again, in this campaign, we had sort of a compressed schedule. But typically, after you get your web page posted, you're going to want to blog about that entry. And so one of the most important things about your blog is that you think of them a little bit differently than just straight sales or marketing. They have a much different tone, a little bit more personal or casual, and they're also going to be adding additional detail or color or information about the technology as opposed to strictly just saying what it is or what it does. So for example, for our blogs on this technology, the hydration system, we talked about the human physiology behind dehydration and also talked about the similarities between space and high-altitude Earth environments, since that was an aspect here. So a couple of things to keep in mind as you do this. It's better to keep your blogs short, typically about 250 words or so, and if you have more information than fits into that small posting, it's better to do a series of posts. So you may do 2, 3, even 4 posts rather than just doing one long post. Also make sure that you really leverage the keywords. So you want to include them in your blog titles or in the links that you include, because you want to make sure that your readers pick up on the key aspects. If you're having other people on your staff help you write these blogs, make sure that they know the keywords that they should be incorporating into the blog posting. Where you can also use images throughout the posting because that helps add some additional elements of interest. Anything that you can add that is of interest or helpful to the reader is also going to be compelling. Now, when you are writing this blog, it's really helpful and efficient to do it at the same time that you're writing your other marketing materials. So even if you're not going to post a blog for a couple of weeks, you can write it at the same time as you are writing your web page content so that you can save time. Now, it's really important that you use analytics for tracking as well. So turning Google Analytics on is very useful, so then you can determine the traffic that's coming to your website. And you can also use other link tracking applications like Bitly. And so you've probably seen Bitly or other link shorteners on Twitter or LinkedIn or other social media. What's interesting about these link shorteners is not only do they cut down on the number of characters in your Twitter post, but they also help you track. If you register for an account, it can track the click volume that goes through that particular link, and it does this for free. So those are really helpful statistics to have to understand the impact of the materials that you're putting together. As far as the level of effort on a blog, this is something that can typically, in many cases, just take an hour to put together. If it's something that's more complex, it may take 2 or 3. But in general, if you're already writing the content for your web page, it's just another hour or so of writer time and maybe 30 minutes or so of a designer to make it look good. And it's a very easy way to augment your web posting. So we can look at an example here of a blog post that was done by one of my colleagues for this technology. So you can see that in this post, which is fairly short, there's a very compelling, eye-catching photo of a system here that displays the technology in use. There are also links throughout the post to relevant websites and other blogs, and this helps, again, drive traffic to places of interest, and it's all of the links that connect together that help drive your search engine optimization. You also always want to make sure that you have a link that goes back to your technology so that somebody can learn more from that web page. Again, all of these blogs are going to point back to that central point of your technology posting on the web. You also want to make sure that you use pretty conversational language in those. So looking at the postings that we did, were they effective for us? We found that they were very effective. So while it's difficult to track the leads back to the specific mechanism that they used to find us, because we would have had to ask individuals how they came across our hydration system, we did generate 5 unsolicited inbound leads. So these were people that we had not talked to through our warm and cold calling. There were different groups of people that reached out to us to learn more about the information. We also had a large number of mentions in industry and news publications. So at 25, that's where we stopped counting how many credible sources had published information about our technology. And we also had over 3,000 hits on Google. So this is pretty good results for, again, a fairly low level of effort in terms of producing these materials. So after you've put your web page together and you've blogged about it, you also want to leverage Twitter. So if you're interested in learning more about the details of tweeting, as Laura mentioned, we did include some details about that in the handouts for this webinar. But we'll just talk a little bit about the strategy of tweeting. So Twitter is a place where you really can be creative. Make your tweets fun and interesting. You don't have too many characters to use, but you really can leverage just a few words to have a compelling message that draws people in. So you want to do something that's creative enough that it gives them a reason to click on that link. And again, make sure that you always leverage Bitly or whatever link shortener you're using to track the traffic that comes from that particular link. And in this case, that link is driving back again to your technology web page. Now, at this point, when we were marketing the hydration system, we were really focusing on using Twitter as a distribution mechanism only, so passing out information to our audience. We hadn't really embarked upon the more in-depth effort of engaging licensing prospects through Twitter, but this is something that you can consider for your campaigns, although you must also consider that it's a bit more time-intensive to try to reach out to specific audiences. Now, in terms of putting together tweets, they are very quick and easy to put together. You have to have a little bit of creativity. But in particular, if you do them while you are writing your other materials, so if you develop the content for your web page, for your blog, and your tweets all together, you can do it very efficiently. And you don't have to develop tweets just one at a time. You can develop a series of them as you're developing your other materials. Why do I need to bother with Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook? Can't I just put my web page up there? But using these other tools really influence the search engine optimization for your technology web page. It's those inbound links from high traffic sites that play into the search engine rankings. And so having these links, which you are posting, enables potential licensees who have a real problem that they're trying to solve. It helps them find you more easily. So when they put in search strings, your technology is going to come up higher on the list if you're using these tools to direct people to your site. So you might wonder, how significant is this impact? So we can look at a couple of results that we saw from leads that we've had from technologies we have marketed. It's often very difficult to come up with detailed metrics, but here are a few examples. So in general, what we see happen is that when you have a web page only, you have very few inbound leads. You might have some, but in general the number is small. When you combine your technology web page with blogging, you definitely see an increase in the number of leads. And then when you add Twitter and LinkedIn activity onto that, we've seen the number of significant leads that come to us jump up quite a bit, and they tend to be much more well qualified as well. So for example, at one point in time we were marketing 10 different technologies passively for a client across a variety of technologies, and we did see that over a 4-month period, we had 5 credible inbound leads come in for these technologies. So while that doesn't sound like a whole lot, you have to remember that we spent almost nothing to do this. And so just being present and using these tools can really help pull people to your websites. So the next thing we'll talk about is once you've posted these things online, so you have your web page, you've done some blogging and some tweeting, that's the time when you're going to begin your warm calls. And a warm call is when you follow up with somebody that you've already spoken to previously, ideally as part of your market assessment. These are people that you got information about the technology and its commercial potential, but they also express that they might be interested in learning more about licensing opportunities. So typically you might send them an email that has a link to your web page or information about upcoming events, and then follow up with a call. So this is something that in the case of this technology, we posted the web page and began our calls in week 1. You might want to spread that out a little bit, as Laura said, over the first few weeks of your technology marketing effort. So as Laura also mentioned, when you are sending those emails, make sure you include only the URL, because often PDFs get blocked by spam blockers. And also you can include much more content on your web page. This is the first step of starting with your warm leads. And one of the things that you might want to consider is practicing on your less important prospects first. So those people that you really think are a good match and you'd really like to get, wait maybe just a little bit until you've done a couple of practice calls to reach them. So then, in this case, we moved on to the trade show in week 2. And you might want to space this out a little bit more if you have the luxury, but in many cases, there are schedules that you're working around that you can't control. As Laura mentioned earlier, this technology was a really good match for a trade show for several reasons. The technology itself was very portable, so it was very easy to take to the trade show and show people. Every player that we wanted to talk to, all of the key players in the market, were going to be at this particular show. And it really was the premier event for this particular type of device. And prospects at this show were really focused on evaluating new technology opportunities. So it was really a great match for us. At this show, we really decided not to do a booth because so many of our prospects had their own booths. And it was very efficient for us to just go meet them where they were going to be. Had we had a booth, we probably would have wasted a lot of time at answering questions from people who weren't serious prospects for us. So it really was much more efficient for us to focus on finding the prospects we wanted to speak with, and therefore a booth wasn't a good match. Now, that's not always the case. In some technologies, it does make more sense to have a booth. And Laura, you were recently involved in another trade show where it did make sense. Can you talk a little bit about that decision and how you use that tool?
Yeah, the difference between these two is in the hydration technology. The trade show in question had 18,000 people at it. It was a huge show, and it covered many different technologies. In our case, this was the high-performance polyimide technology that I mentioned before for flexible displays. And the trade show here had about 250 people attending it, and it was only for flexible displays. So everybody in attendance was a target for us and of interest for us. And so having a booth made a whole lot more sense because we did want everybody at the show coming to us and asking us questions. The other aspect was the samples that we had. We had a 3-foot-long roll of flexible film, and we couldn't very well walk around with that, whereas with the hydration system, it's kind of like a little backpack, so it's much easier to go booth to booth. We had multiple types of samples, and so walking around really just wasn't an option for us, but it was very cost-effective to have the booth in this case. Danielle?
Thanks. That's a great example of two contrasting approaches to trade shows. So the next question is, how do you incorporate social media into these type of live events? Because you can really leverage the fact that you're at a trade show or a similar type of event as part of your marketing campaign. So one of the first things you want to do is determine if there is a hashtag on Twitter that applies to your particular event. If that is the case, then in each of your tweets that you do, you should use that hashtag so that people that are following the events and the happenings for that particular trade show or other event will find your post. You can also include photos in your tweets or in your blogs. And again, people like to see that visual media, and it draws them in to read more. Sometimes people host a tweet up, so that is where Twitter followers all meet in a single location, but that can be one way that you draw prospects together so that you get to speak with them. There are many different clients and applications that you can use to tweet, and many of them allow you to schedule tweets. So that's something else that you can do to sort of keep the burden off of you, is develop some tweets ahead of time and then schedule those to be posted while you're at the trade show. But you can also tweet spontaneously to generate some buzz. So if you're about to go into a meeting, or if you've just had a good discussion about something, you can tweet about that. And again, it makes it kind of personal, so getting a warm reception from vendors interested in freeze-proof hydration systems. That puts a positive spin on your technology. It might spur somebody on to learn more. And of course, you include the link that drives back to your web page. The next tweet talks about how many meetings that you've had, indicating that there's interest in this technology, which might spur somebody to jump on the bandwagon and join in and learn more as well. So those are a variety of tools and ways that you can approach using social media during your live event, with a combination of planning ahead of time and also tweeting from the event spontaneously. Laura, do you want to talk at all about how you use social media at the FlexTech show?
Yeah, so even though we had a booth as opposed to walking the floor, we had a very similar approach to tweeting throughout the event, but we did the combination of scheduled tweets of things that we knew were happening ahead of time. So the event had certain activities that were happening, and we were able to precognitively make mention of going to this session on where Colon will be discussing this technology. Come join us. Those were all able to be scheduled ahead of time, but in addition to that, we did live tweet as we had great meetings and people made specific comments about the technology. So in this case, because it was such a smaller show and targeted to just the flexible displays, we had some great quotes from people that came to our booth that commented on, this is really very transparent, it's got great durability, and we captured all of that and added it to our tweets.
Yeah, the other thing to think about is not just tweets, but also using your blog at these shows. For every show that we go to, we do that. Here's an example of the blogs that you might do. So we had the first blog that we posted about the technology itself, so keeping hydrated at high altitudes, that post at the bottom. But then we did a blog post from the show, and then we did one wrapping up the show. And again, spacing these out a little bit allows you to keep prospects engaged. Contrary to what may seem to be the case, people are not continuously on social media, so it's possible they might miss one of your blog posts or one of your tweets. So you want to spread them out. And as you do that, you also get different content over the course of the event that you're at. So it's a way that you can provide new information to potential prospects and try to engage them as they're viewing social media. So in terms of the hydration system and our results at the trade show, it was a tremendous success for us. So there were 18 prospects, all leaders in the market, that got to see our system, ask us questions, and we got to discuss with them the value and the benefits of them. We had non-disclosure agreements that were signed right at the show for follow-on discussions. Both of the top two prospects, the two people that we were most interested in, were engaged during the show, and multiple follow-up meetings were arranged with them. It also generated leads for partnership in related areas. So it wasn't directly licensing of this technology, but people saw the type of technology that was part of this particular prototype and were interested in other applications. So it was an overwhelming success for us. Laura, do you want to comment on the results from the FlexTech show?
Yeah, similar positive results. We had 2 requests from companies that wanted to go to Korea to visit the client company and their site because they wanted to learn more about the manufacturing technique, and we had dozens of requests for samples so that they could specifically test them, and so we signed at least a dozen NDAs because that was required in order to get samples of it. So it was very positive, and for several months afterwards we continued with the follow-up and are nurturing those discussions as we move forward.
So as you can see, the trade show can be very powerful. Again, you want to consider it within the context of the resources that you have available to you, but for the right technologies at the right shows, it can be very, very beneficial. Now for this technology, we did an inventor podcast, also known as a webcast. There are multiple terms used, but basically this was an interview done with the inventor. And in this case, it was spaced out a little bit from the other activities, again, because you want to update content on your website over time so that people stay engaged. Now, we looked at this as a way to give people a little bit more personal look into the technology. And again, one of the aspects Laura talked about before is some people read things, but other people like to hear or be presented to. So having something that has more of a video or an audio format to it can be very valuable to your website. Now, there are a couple of things to keep in mind when planning this type of medium, when looking at doing a podcast or a webcast. So the first is considering the technology that you have. Is it something that can be easily described verbally? In the case of the hydration system, it was easy to describe that in an audio-only format. Now, more complex technologies might not work so well for an audio-type podcast and may be more well-suited for some type of video, or it may just be too complex. But you really have to think about the technology and what sort of mechanism of delivery would work for that technology. The other thing to think about is your inventor. So in some cases, you have an inventor like we did that was very dynamic, very well-spoken, comfortable speaking with people, and so he really was a great candidate for interviewing on a podcast. Now, there are others that may not be so comfortable doing that, and you have a couple of options. So one option is to script answers for your inventor. In the case that we did not script his answers, but we gave him the questions ahead of time so that he could prepare. But some people feel much more comfortable working from a script, and you can still create a very good podcast using that method. Now, another option may be to get information from your inventor, but then have somebody else actually record the audio that describes the technology and its benefits and applications. So you can use a podcast a number of different ways, but you really need to think about the technology and the inventor and their personality and figure out how they fit together. Now, the other thing to think about is the format that you use. So for this podcast, we used a question and answer format where we provided the inventor with questions ahead of time and then he answered. In other cases, you might want to use just more of a storytelling type format. There are lots of different options there, but it's the addition of a different type of medium to your web page that really draws people in. Now, when you do this, there are also logistics to consider. So make sure that people are calling with a good phone connection, talking from a quiet room. You don't need to use sophisticated recording, but it's good to make sure that you have professional editing to give it a polished feel, and then you'll add this to the website. Laura, do you want to talk about your experience with the scripting of podcasts in terms of what you've done in the past and what you found to work well?
Yeah, in the case of the hydration system, we were incredibly lucky. This was an ex-shuttle astronaut and a medical doctor, so he was very accustomed to dealing with the media. He'd also climbed Mount Everest. He was a different character than what you normally are going to encounter in having an innovator for a technology. Not to say that they're not all wonderful, but they're not all necessarily as accustomed to public speaking. So we were lucky that the Q&A format and unscripted worked out very well because he was very casual and comfortable and also understood that he had to stay on target for discussing what the technology could do for people as opposed to getting into the details of what the technology does or how it does it. Most of the time, our experience is that innovators want to do a deep dive on explaining how their technology works, and that's not what you're trying to achieve in these podcasts or webcasts. You really want to keep them on target or on subject for talking about it from the market perspective. And that can be difficult for them. And for that reason, we tend to usually script them out. Even if it's going to be a Q&A, we may go through that practice session with them and make sure that we've given them some bullets so that they can guide that discussion and coach them on what the content is that you want to do. Help them to be successful, because this is not a usual mechanism for innovators to communicate, so you want to help them do it as well as possible. And if you can add PowerPoint slides to the discussion, or again that webcast as opposed to just audio, that always helps make it a more dynamic multimedia activity. But work based on what your inventor is good at. Think about that before you figure out how you're going to do it. Danielle?
Those are great points. And we have found that this digital type of collateral is extremely effective. We were actually surprised at how popular some of these pieces have been. So the podcasts, the webcasts or videocasts, as well as demonstration opportunities really do work. You do have to remember to look at the number of hits that you get in context of your particular marketing campaign. So if you look at the podcast for this hydration system, you see that we had 177 hits. Now, in comparison to the software demos that we did where we got 600 hits, that may seem very small. But then when you consider that the hydration system really had only 10 to 15 targets that we were looking at in terms of potential licensees, and that's in contrast to the software technologies that had hundreds of targets each, the 177 looks pretty good, because that's a pretty high number for looking at just a small number of targets. Another thing to keep in mind with your link tracking is that monitoring these results can help you gauge the impact that a particular technology is having, so you know whether your campaign is effective or not. And that will allow you to do a couple of different things. So one, do you need to change how you're communicating information about your technology? Or it's also possible that your technology is not as interesting to the market as you thought it might be, and it might be time to consider going to a more passive marketing effort. So tracking the effectiveness of your different marketing mechanisms can be very effective in terms of helping you use your resources wisely. Now, all of these items that we've talked about here really are fairly low cost. So don't be thrown off by the word video or recording or even professional. To us, this means using tools like Camtasia or Adobe Captivate when you're recording, and you can use voiceover that someone like Laura or I might do just sitting at our desk. So this is very low cost. It's not something that's tens of thousands of dollars in a studio or a professional film production. So once you've generated this other digital collateral, be it a podcast or a slide cast or a video, you're going to want to make sure that your prospects know about it. So for us, that meant following up via email, blogging, and then using Twitter. And as you do this, you want to use a subject line that is compelling. So you want to focus on the market need, not the technology, because people will have been familiar with the technology. You want to make it clear to them that this is new information. It's something that's different. So as you can see here, there are a couple of different ways to do that. But for example, hear from climber Parazynski about his summit challenges and how he kept water from freezing on Mount Everest. So Mount Everest catches people's attention, and you have that market need of keeping water from freezing that are clear in your subject line. You might also want to talk about how a particular software tool reduces effort by 75% and is available for licensing now. So again, use key terms in your subject. Don't just state the name of the technology. Laura, you want to talk about any other email experiences you've had in terms of follow-up and getting people to engage again with your technology?
Yeah, be careful about using attachments in email, especially if this is your first email exchange with people, because they can often trigger spam. And so they'll either get stripped out or your email is going to end up in their spam folder. So we actually advise that you not put any attachments in there. Put URLs, links to your web page and specific areas within there. That's probably one of the most important things when thinking about email these days. The second is think about the volume of what you're sending out. Your web server system may flag if you're trying to send out 200 emails all at once. they may block you again because they're going to think you're spam. So be cognizant of that and maybe do them in smaller chunks. Usually you're going to have smaller groups that are specific to certain industries. So you may craft your email message to be specific to the medical industry and send it out to a group of 20, doing a mail merge so that it's personalized for them. And then another group of 30 that's going out to the aerospace industry. So just be aware of some of the logistical aspects that occur with email as well.
Along those lines, something else you can think about is the timing. So I mentioned that after you've developed this podcast, you'll want to email about it and blog and tweet. So you might want to send out your email, and then as we did here, we waited a couple of weeks before we blogged about the podcast and put out then tweets about the blog. And that allows you to have a couple more touch points with people and different ways to draw them in. Because as we mentioned, people aren't on their social media tools every day. One statistic we've seen is that only about 50% of Facebook users log on in a given day. So you want to have multiple ways that you reach them so that you can try to catch them. And finding interesting and engaging spins for your message really does draw people in and is pretty important. The last big activity for this technology was an R&D 100 award that we won. Now, as you can see here, this actually happened in month 7. Again, one of those timing things that really couldn't be controlled. It would be nice if that had been much earlier in the cycle. The timing just wasn't such. However, it was still really valuable for many reasons. So it was great public relations for our client, and it also increased the valuation of the technology, which is something that can factor into your licensing negotiations. So an award or some other sort of credible evidence that your technology really does work and is valuable really can help your marketing efforts. Laura, you want to talk about any other aspects of how awards can positively impact in terms of valuation or negotiations?
Yeah, it's not just about this particular technology. So yes, it's going to improve the PR level of your technology and therefore brings value to the licensee, because the more coverage they've got, the better it is for their marketing activities. But it's that prestige level that adds to the value. It also adds to your organizational value. So you are viewed as being very capable and award-winning in this particular area. So for any technology activity that you're doing, this is going to increase your credibility and your prestige, and that improves, again, your ability to license the technology and get higher value for any of your technologies. The other part is that often in licensing activities, you may get a licensee at one point in the process, get an award, and then still be looking for additional licensees. So it augments not just your current licensees' PR ability, but also your future licensees' interest and attraction to the technology. So there's a lot of visibility, not just for the technology, but also for your office.
And one other thing to point out about awards is, again, you can leverage timing to be efficient in how you develop things. So for many of the awards that are available, the application is fairly similar from year to year. So if you think you have a technology that is a good candidate for a particular award, go ahead and write that award application at the same time that you're doing your web page content, your blogs, your tweets. That way you can be very efficient about your writing. So as we look back on all of this, how did it go? For us, we really did meet our goals. So we had great click-through results and really got some good PR out of this. We engaged top prospects. So in our licensing discussion, we had 2 of the top prospects. And as I mentioned before, we also had partnership discussions with a 3rd prospect that was a leader in performance apparel for elite athletes. So again, they weren't looking to license this technology, but they learned about the client's capabilities and were interested in other development, which had the potential to lead to other licenses in the future. We also put a field testing agreement in place with the military. So for this one technology, there were a variety of different venues that came out of our marketing efforts that were very, very positive. So I'm now going to pass it back to Laura to just summarize all of these key points of incorporating social media into your marketing efforts.
Thanks, Danielle. So, though we have talked about social media today pretty specifically about a technology, you really want to make sure that you're looking at your social media strategy organization-wide, because you don't want to do social media like tweeting and blogging on one technology and then disappear for months. That's not effective strategy for social media. You need to be consistent and ongoing. And so your whole office may need to get on board, or a few people within your office need to get on board to participate in this process, or at least leverage it even if there's only one person that's providing all of the content. So for example, we have a primary person that does our tweeting, but the entire organization uses her to help put our messages out. And so all of our different campaigns will leverage social media at different times during the year, and you've got that ongoing activity. So it takes some planning from that perspective. Also think strategically across your whole office. So it's not just licensing any particular technology, but you may also want to build your credibility as being a thought leader in a particular industry area or in technology transfer. Talk about different events that you have going on. So you're mixing up that content. It's not just technology based. And then you want to craft your message from end to end for each one of those strategic aspects that you're moving forward with. So in the case of the hydration system, we really looked at the whole life cycle of it and planned out, we're doing these following events and we're going to have these different activities. When are we going to blog and tweet about each of those? What LinkedIn organizations can we leverage, and look at the whole picture so that you are maximizing the number of touch points that you have with your audience, and preferably you can stretch them out over the entire campaign and not bunch them up. And then you want to also match up your communication style with those different audiences. So again, those audiences may vary day to day. In one technology area, it could be the medical industry. In another, it could be consumer recreational equipment. And another day, it could be your colleagues for the tech transfer community. The more different communities that you get on board following you on Twitter, getting your RSS feed, it improves your statistics, again, for Google. You're attracting different audiences in, and you're maintaining that contact with them. And then always have that strong call to action. With social media, it's almost always the click-through. Make sure that you've got those tiny URLs with your Google Analytics turned on so that you can find out where people are coming from and how long they're staying, and that you're taking a look at your strategy as a whole and identifying for each different campaign what's working and what's not. We like to create a master editorial calendar, and what that means is that we schedule out at least 2 to 3 months in advance all the different things that we're going to be blogging on, and then intersperse that with tweeting and other activities. And again, that's that mix of opinion pieces, technology pieces, event activities. And the more you can kind of stack up that content ahead of time, it will make your life easier so that you're not on a Thursday afternoon saying, oh no, I have to get my blog out today, and trying to get it done quickly. That's when you might make mistakes. You can create that content ahead of time and have it scheduled out. That helps you a couple ways. One, you'll be more effective with your resources because, as Danielle pointed out several times, write multiple pieces at the same time. So when you're creating your marketing materials, you write your blogs, you write your awards and your tweets all at the same time, but you space them out. Two, it also helps you make sure that you are varying that content so that people stay attracted to you and want to come spend time with you. Again, make sure you've got those Google Analytics working and using Bitly. They are very powerful tools to help you analyze what's working and looking at your metrics on a monthly basis so that you can adjust appropriately and actually react appropriately. So if you see that there is an article or something that you have posted that got a lot of activity, that's a cue that you probably need to follow up with some of these players, or maybe do an additional blog to continue to reach out to them. Always, always use your keywords. These are very important for all the reasons we've discussed today, but with your Google searches so that you get those serendipity hits, but also in maintaining your audience that is particular to that topic area. So the hashtags and things like that are related to your keywords. And frankly, you need to be patient. Social media takes a while before you're going to catch on. So if you are just starting your Twitter account now, you're not going to have a whole lot of followers, but they will come. And it could take a month or two, if not 6, before you have enough meaningful content that they start following you. And it's good for you to follow them. Pick some key people that you're looking for to be part of your audience. Start by following them, and then they can follow you back. They'll find out about you. That will take time before you get there. We started our campaign of using social media back in about 2010, and we have done very well, but that's been 2 years in the making of making sure that we are a strong presence and recognized as being a content provider in social media. And then you want to also pay attention to key dates like those trade shows and things like that, and maneuver your activities around those dates that are out of your control. Try to schedule around those, and keep a log of all of your posts so that you're aware of what you did and when you did it, so that you're not redundant, but also you can leverage off of those things. We hope that this has been helpful for you. Remember, we do have additional insights about the nuts and bolts of using social media on this URL that we provide here, but also in your handout. There's a lot more details on how to use Twitter and Bitly and some additional do's and don'ts that you should be aware of as you're launching on using social media for technology marketing. We thank you for your time, and we hope that you have found this helpful.